Shelby, North Carolina, they always felt slow in the summer. On the edges of town, where the old sycamores cast patchy shadows over cracked sidewalks, 9-year-old Claire Thompson made her way down the narrow street toward the little city park every Sunday afternoon. The houses she passed seemed to sink under the weight of the humidity. Porches drooping, paint peeling, the quiet almost heavy enough to break. Claire walked with a limp that wasn't really a limp, more like a cautious shuffle. Her left arm was locked in a bright blue cast covered in doodles, names, and one shaky heart drawn by her best friend, Emily, the week before school ended for summer break. The cast was heavy, awkward. It made the whole world feel tilted. Her face was pale under a mop of brown bangs, eyes cast down, lost somewhere in her own world. She carried a letter clutched tightly in her good hand, fingers pressing wrinkles into the envelope. On the front, in neat, careful handwriting, it said, "Daddy, overseas." The address was nothing but hope. Her father was a soldier, somewhere across the world, and every Sunday Claire wrote him a letter and dropped it in the rusted old mailbox at the park. Maybe it got to him. Maybe it didn't. But she wrote anyway, because words felt safer than silence. That Sunday, the air was thick, buzzing with cicadas. Claire reached the park's entrance, a worn metal gate hanging crooked, and slipped through, careful not to let the hinges squeal. Her cast thumped against her side. She made her way to the faded red mailbox planted at the edge of the playground, where the grass grew tall and wild. She paused, looked around. That's when she noticed the dog. He was there again, a golden collie, fur shining like warm sunlight, tail brushing the dirt as he sat perfectly still near the bench. His eyes were fixed on her, gentle, patient, and impossibly aware. He didn't bark or move, just watched, as if he'd been waiting all day for her to arrive. Claire had seen him before, just once, the Sunday after her fall. Back then she'd been too shy to look directly at him, too raw and bruised inside to trust any new presence in her shrinking world. This time, she let her gaze linger. There was something steady in the way the dog sat, ears twitching with the breeze, nose pointed, just enough to seem polite, not intrusive. Claire took a shaky breath and turned back to the mailbox, sliding her letter in with care. The sound of paper meeting metal was softer than usual, almost swallowed by the hush. She turned to leave, but something, curiosity, loneliness, maybe just the simple need to be seen, made her pause and glance back. The collie was still watching, unmoving, as if making a silent promise to keep guard over her words. The park felt different with him there, less empty, less sharp. She considered talking to him, just a quick hello, but the words caught in her throat. She wasn't used to speaking out loud anymore, not since her dad left, not since the accident. So instead, she simply nodded and walked away, feeling his gaze following her like a thread of gold. At the edge of the park, she risked one last look. The dog still hadn't moved. When she got home, her mom was already gone for the afternoon shift at the hospital. Claire stood in the empty kitchen, the silence pressing in from all sides. The smell of toast lingered, cold and distant. She sat at the little table by the window, unfolded her notebook, and stared at the blank page. For a long time. She didn't write anything. She just listened to the quiet, half expecting to hear the collie's soft footsteps outside. Though she knew that was silly. The next morning, and every morning that week, Claire walked to the park. Before breakfast. Each time, the collie was waiting. Sometimes on the bench, sometimes sprawled in the shade beneath the swings. He never approached, never barked. But he was always there, watchful, kind-eyed, and somehow more knowing when she needed him most. Claire started to feel like he was more than a dog. Maybe a messenger, or a guardian, or just a friend who didn't need words. She started calling him Sunday, because that's when he'd first appeared, and because Sunday was the only day that still felt soft in her life. The rest of the week was school and chores and awkward silences, Sunday, though, belonged to her letters, and to Sunday, the collie. One afternoon, as she was leaving the park, Claire noticed a couple of older boys watching her from the baseball diamond. She froze, her heart beating hard against her ribs. But Sunday rose silently and trotted to her side. The boys looked at the dog, hesitated, and then turned away. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That night, lying in bed, Claire stared at the ceiling and thought about her dad, her letters, and the collie who sat guard over her words. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel quite so invisible. Somewhere far away, she imagined her dad opening her letter, reading about a dog with golden fur and steady eyes. She smiled, just a little, and let sleep pull her under, safe in the knowledge that someone, at least one someone, was watching out for her. And in the park, under the faint light of the moon, Sunday waited. Once, Claire had been the kind of kid whose laugh was easy and contagious. She used to fly down the street on her scooter, hair streaming behind her, calling to Emily or waving at the mailman, her voice full of confidence and joy. She'd crack jokes at the dinner table, making her mom snort laugh, and her dad wipe away tears as he pretended to choke on mashed potatoes. It was as if a small sun had lived inside her, and everyone around her could feel its warmth. But that was before her dad's unit shipped out, leaving an emptiness in the house that echoed through the halls like the whistle of a distant train. Before the late-night calls faded, her dad's voice, a brittle wire that snapped each time the connection dropped. Before the fall, which happened on a cold, wet Thursday after school. That day, Claire had been running across the gym's slick floor, trying to beat the rain out the side door before anyone else. Her shoes slid. She tumbled hard, her arm twisting beneath her body, a sharp, white-hot pain exploding through her. She remembered the blue gym mats and the metallic smell of sweat and panic, the way Mrs. Hendricks knelt beside her and tried to keep her calm, even as the pain turned her breath to sobs. The cast came later. Hospital lights, the scent of antiseptic, her mother's worried face hovering above her, and in all of it, a bone-deep loneliness. Friends came to visit at first, but they didn't know what to say. Emily brought cards and candy, but Claire could feel the distance growing, the awkward silences that hadn't been there before. By the time the cast set and the pain faded to a dull ache, Claire had learned to keep quiet. She drifted through the days, silent, careful, determined not to draw attention. At school, Claire's new reputation settled over her like dust. The quiet kid. No one used to call her that. Now she slipped into her seat at the back of the room and kept her head down. At lunch, she sat by the window, tracing shapes on the table with her finger. When the teacher called on her, she looked away, pretending not to hear. She didn't mind it. Not really. Not when everything else felt so loud inside her. Sometimes, though, the noise broke through. Kids would whisper about her, thinking she couldn't hear. "That's Claire. Her dad's in the army, right? I heard she broke her arm falling off the monkey bars. Why doesn't she ever talk?" The questions hung in the air, thick and sticky, but Claire never answered them. She built a wall, brick by invisible brick, and hid behind it. Her mom worked long shifts at the hospital, gone before sunrise, home late and exhausted. Claire learned how to make her own breakfast, how to reheat soup for dinner, how to write notes and leave them on the fridge for when her mom got home. Fed the cat. Did homework. Going to bed. Love you. The notes became their way of talking. Small, practical, but loaded with all the things neither of them said out loud. Most evenings, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table, her cast resting awkwardly on the surface, a stack of paper and pens in front of her. She wrote letters to her dad, each one a lifeline thrown across an ocean. Sometimes, she filled the page with questions about his day, asking about the weather, the food, the people he met. Other times, she wrote about her own life, school, the teachers, the cat's latest adventure. Always, though, the words swelled with a mix of hope and hurt. She wanted her dad to know she was okay, But she also wanted him to know she missed him, that the ache in her chest never really went away. Every Sunday, after finishing her letter, Claire would walk to the park and mail it. She liked the ritual, the way the walk made her feel purposeful, the cool air on her face, the sound of gravel under her sneakers. It was the one time each week she felt almost normal, like the girl she used to be. And always, Sunday was there. The golden collie had become a fixture, as much a part of the landscape as the rusted mailbox or the crooked gate. Sometimes Claire wondered if anyone else noticed him, or if he was her own secret companion. She never saw him with anyone else. He seemed to appear only when she arrived, settling in a patch of sun or shade, watching her with patient eyes. As the weeks slipped by, Claire started talking to Sunday. Quietly at first, then more openly. She'd tell him little stories about her week, whispering confessions she couldn't say to anyone else. She told him about Emily's new haircut, about the pop quiz in math class, about how much she missed laughing. Sunday never judged, never turned away. He just listened, his tail thumping the ground now and then, his ears flicking in the breeze. At night, when Claire struggled to sleep, she'd remember the feeling of Sunday's eyes on her, the warmth that radiated from his fur even from a distance. It was almost enough to quiet the storm inside her, to make the silence bearable. She imagined her dad sitting somewhere far away, reading her letters, and smiled at the thought of him knowing about her secret friend. There were hard days, of course. Days when the cast itched or her arm ached, when the loneliness felt too big to contain. On those days, Claire wrote longer letters, sometimes filling up 2 or 3 pages. She poured everything out, her fears, her wishes, the things she missed about their old life. She drew little doodles in the margins, hearts, stars, a lopsided drawing of Sunday, chasing a butterfly. Her mother noticed the drawings, the lengthening letters. She didn't say much, just ruffled Claire's hair and smiled a tired smile. Once, late at night, Claire overheard her mom on the phone with her grandma, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's coping, I think. She's so quiet now. I just wish I could do more." But Claire wasn't sure what else anyone could do. All she wanted was for her dad to come home, for the ache to go away, for the world to tilt back to the way it used to be. Until then, she had her letters, her walks to the park, and Sunday. The dog who seemed to understand every unspoken word. The world saw Claire as the quiet kid. But inside, her heart beat loud as thunder, waiting for someone to hear it. The cicadas had quieted down a bit, the sticky North Carolina summer stretching lazily into dusk, as Claire once again found herself walking toward the park, a new letter tucked carefully in her pocket. The envelope was thicker this time. She'd drawn a silly cartoon in the corner for her dad, hoping he'd smile when he saw it. Her cast still thumped awkwardly against her side, but she was getting used to its weight. It had become another silent companion, always there, marking the time since everything changed. That evening, Claire arrived at the rusted old mailbox as the sun dipped low, casting a golden wash across the playground. As usual, the collie was waiting, golden fur glowing, tongue lolling, eyes warm and knowing. This time, though, Claire felt something different. The silence between them felt charged, alive, almost as if Sunday was expecting something more than just a silent exchange. Taking a deep breath, Claire walked over and sat on the edge of the weathered bench beside the mailbox, her letter balanced on her lap. Sunday moved closer, settling on the ground just a few feet away, his head tilted with gentle curiosity. Claire stared at her letter, fingers trembling slightly. The words inside were heavy, stories she couldn't tell her mom, worries she didn't want to burden anyone with. Maybe, she thought, it was time to say them out loud. She began to read. Her voice came out small at first, but steady. She told her dad about her week at school, about the math test she was sure she'd failed, about Emily's new obsession with collecting rocks. She described the cat knocking over the flower vase, the funny way her mom talked to herself while cooking. The longer she spoke, the easier it became, her voice finding a quiet rhythm. her body relaxing as if a hidden knot was slowly untangling. Sunday listened, head cocked, ears twitching every now and then, as if he understood every word. When Claire's voice faltered, he inched a little closer, offering the kind of presence that didn't ask questions or rush her along. By the time she finished the letter, the park had emptied, the shadows growing longer, the cicadas humming again. A breeze swept through, scattering loose leaves across the playground. Claire stood up and walked to the mailbox, slipping her letter through the slot. As the metal clanged shut, she turned to Sunday and managed a small, grateful smile. Thanks for listening," she whispered. The dog's tail thumped once against the ground, slow and reassuring. On the walk home, something extraordinary happened. Claire noticed Sunday, trailing behind her, not close enough to touch, but never letting her out of sight. Each time she glanced back, she saw the flash of golden fur between the trees, a silent promise of company. When she reached her yard, Sunday stopped at the edge of the lawn, sitting quietly as if respecting a boundary he didn't want to cross. Claire hesitated by the porch, her heart fluttering. No one had followed her home in a long time. No one had waited just for her. She stood there, the silence stretching between them, until the porch light flickered on, signaling her mother's return from work. With one last look at Sunday, Claire ducked inside. Dinner was quiet, as always. Her mom asked about her day, and Claire gave short answers, saving her longer stories for her next letter. As she cleared her plate, she thought about Sunday waiting outside, the patient eyes, the warm presence. She wondered if he was still there in the dark, keeping watch. Later that night, after her mom had gone to bed, Claire crept downstairs, pulling her favorite blanket around her shoulders. She opened the front door quietly, careful not to wake anyone, and stepped onto the porch. The world was still, bathed in moonlight, and there, at the edge of the yard, was Sunday, curled up but alert, as if he'd known she would come out. Claire sat down on the top step, tucking her legs beneath her. She had another letter with her, one she hadn't mailed. This one wasn't for her dad. It was for herself. A list of fears, hopes, the kind of secret things kids only whisper to the night. She unfolded the paper, and after a moment's hesitation, began to read it aloud. "My name is Claire," she said, her voice shaking just a bit. "And I'm scared a lot these days. I miss my dad. I miss feeling like things are normal." She paused, looking at Sunday, whose eyes glowed softly in the dark. "But I think it's okay to be scared sometimes. And I think you understand." Sunday inched closer, resting his chin on the bottom step, so close Claire could have reached out and touched his head. For a long while, she just sat there, reading, and then simply sitting, letting the weight of her worries settle in the night air. That became their new ritual. Whenever Claire needed to practice her letters, she did it with Sunday on the porch. She read him her drafts, sometimes stumbling over her words, sometimes adding silly jokes or stories she'd never dare tell her mom. The dog listened, always still, always attentive, never interrupting or growing bored. As the days passed, something in Claire started to change. Her voice grew stronger, or her laughter a little easier, the ache in her chest less sharp. She found herself looking forward to reading out loud, to feeling Sunday's calm energy beside her. At school, she even managed to answer a question in class, surprising herself and her teacher. The other kids still whispered, but their words didn't sting as much as before. She had a secret listener now, one who never let her feel alone. Sometimes, as the sun set and the world turned gold, Claire would sit on the porch and draw pictures of Sunday in her notebook. She'd try to capture his expression, the way his eyes seemed to smile, the way he listened as if every word mattered. Her drawings were clumsy, but she didn't care. They were hers. One evening, as she finished reading a particularly long letter to Sunday, her mom poked her head out the door, smiling at the sight. "You've got quite an audience tonight," she teased gently. Claire just grinned, hugging her knees to her chest. "He's a really good listener, Mom. The best." Her mom sat beside her for a moment, watching the collie, then quietly ruffled Claire's hair. "Looks like you're in good company." When bedtime came, Claire always said goodnight to Sunday before heading inside, watching until he faded into the shadows of the trees. The nights felt less lonely now, the silence less heavy. For the first time in a long while, Claire drifted off to sleep with a sense of comfort, a hope that maybe, just maybe, things would get better a little easier, and every morning when she woke up, she checked the yard. Sunday never stayed all night, but his paw prints in the dewy grass proved he'd been there, keeping watch while the world slept. Summer in Shelby seemed to settle into a gentle rhythm, marked by the passage of slow days and the comforting certainty of small routines. For Claire, the world outside might have stayed the same. Neighbors tending to their lawns, the distant hum of lawnmowers, cicadas singing their endless song. But inside, something was quietly transforming. It started with a single decision, reading her letters to Sunday. That ritual, simple as it was, became the center of Claire's world. Every afternoon, after her mom's shift began, and the house slipped into its silent hush, Claire would gather her supplies at the kitchen table. She lined up her favorite colored pens, a stack of crisp white paper, and sometimes a box of stickers she'd found buried in her closet. Her left arm, still in its blue cast, no longer felt like a burden. It was a mark of survival, a silent reminder that she could heal. She poured more of herself into her letters. They grew longer, more detailed, full of questions and daydreams. "Do you get to see the stars over there, Daddy? Are they as bright as the ones above the park?" She began to add little stories about Emily's mishaps with her new rollerblades, about the cat's ongoing war with the neighbor's squirrel, even about the nosy mailman who always lingered by the old red mailbox as if he too were waiting for something magical to happen. The act of writing became less about the ache of missing her dad and more about the joy of sharing the world as she saw it, in all its strange, beautiful details. Claire found herself drawing silly cartoons in the margins, pressing stickers shaped like hearts, stars, and even paw prints onto the envelopes. Sometimes she tucked a pressed flower or a scrap of ribbon inside, imagining her dad's smile when he opened her letters. And always she read them aloud to Sunday. Their meetings became as regular as clockwork. Sunday was always waiting, sometimes sprawled lazily in the patch of sunlight beneath the swings, other times perched like a sentinel near the bench by the mailbox. It didn't matter if Claire was early or late. Somehow, the dog always seemed to know when she would arrive. She grew bolder with her voice. The first time she cracked a joke out loud, a terrible one about a squirrel and a peanut, she half expected Sunday to ignore her. Instead, his tail wagged, eyes lighting up as if he found her the funniest person in the world. Encouraged, Claire added more jokes, more stories, little asides that would have embarrassed her in front of anyone else. There was a freedom in it, a wild honesty that belonged only to the two of them. She talked about things she'd never admit at school, how lonely she felt at lunchtime, how the cast made her self-conscious, how sometimes she was so angry at the world she wanted to scream. Sunday never judged, never interrupted. He just listened, his head cocked and his eyes gentle. One afternoon, as she read about the time she'd tripped in front of the entire class and spilled her lunch tray everywhere, Sunday rolled onto his back and kicked his paws in the air like he was laughing with her. Claire couldn't help but giggle. Real from the belly laughter that felt strange and wonderful. For a moment, she forgot about the ache, the missing, the silence. Their connection deepened in small, quiet ways. Claire began to bring treats for Sunday. Little cubes of cheese, the last bits of her sandwich, or when she could sneak it, a piece of leftover roast chicken from dinner. Sunday accepted every offering with the grace of a king. Never greedy, always grateful. In return, he offered his constant presence, his unwavering attention, and sometimes a gentle nuzzle when Claire's words caught in her throat. The neighbors started to notice the girl and the dog in the park. Mrs. Lively, who lived across the street, mentioned to Claire's mom that she'd never seen a collie so devoted. Mr. Archer, the mailman, smiled every time he passed by, tipping his hat and leaving a handful of extra dog biscuits in the mailbox, just in case. Even a few kids from school began to linger by the playground, curious about the secret world Claire and Sunday seemed to share. At home, Claire's mom noticed changes too. She watched, sometimes from the window, as Claire read her letters on the porch. Sunday curled at her feet. She saw the way Claire's voice grew stronger, her smile returning bit by bit. Sometimes, late at night, Claire's mom would find a stack of half-finished letters on the kitchen table, covered in doodles and dreams. She didn't say much, but she started saving her change for Claire's favorite pens and picking up stickers at the grocery store. As the weeks passed, Claire's letters became a diary, a confession, a bridge to something softer inside herself. She didn't just write for her dad anymore. She wrote for Sunday, for herself, for anyone who might need to know what it felt like to be heard. One evening, after reading a particularly long letter about the first time she'd ever ridden a bike without training wheels, Claire looked at Sunday and whispered, I think you're my best friend. Sunday blinked, yawned, and pressed his head into her side. Claire grinned, pressing her cheek against his fur. You're a really good diary, or you know that? She didn't need him to answer. She could feel it in the steady thump of his tail, the gentle warmth of his body beside her. Later that night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant chirp of crickets, Claire felt something she hadn't known in months. A sense of hope. Maybe her dad would be home soon. Maybe school would get easier. Maybe things would never be quite the same. But that didn't mean they couldn't be good again. She closed her eyes, picturing Sunday's golden fur shimmering in the sunlight, and let the feeling carry her into sleep. And so summer rolled on. Each day, the ritual grew stronger, a thread weaving Claire and Sunday together, word by word, letter by letter, until silence itself began to unravel and the world felt a little less lonely. It was the second week of September when Claire first noticed the new boy at school. His name was Lucas, and he had a habit of sitting with his feet propped up on the back of the chair in front of him, slouching down as if the world owed him something. He was taller than the other fourth graders, his hair cut short and spiky, his eyes always scanning the room with a mixture of boredom and calculation. The teachers tried to be welcoming, but even on his first day, Lucas seemed to challenge the very air around him. For Claire, school had become manageable, not fun, not yet, but at least less scary. She had Sunday, and her letters, and her little routines. She still didn't say much in class, but she'd begun to answer the occasional question and even nodded along when Emily told her a story at lunch. The world was not as sharp as it once was, the loneliness not so heavy. But Lucas, he had a way of finding cracks in people and pushing his words right through them. It started on a Thursday afternoon, just after recess. Claire was standing by the playground fence, waiting for the bell to ring, when she heard Lucas's voice behind her. "Hey, quiet kid," he called, too loud so everyone could hear. Claire stiffened, but said nothing. He leaned in, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You talked to that dog in the park, right? My sister saw you. She said you sit there reading letters to it. What's the matter? You got no real friends?" A few kids turned to look, some giggling, others pretending not to notice. Claire's cheeks burned hot, her eyes fixed on the grass. She tried to walk away, but Lucas followed, his words chasing after her. She thinks you're weird, talking to a mutt like it's a person. Maybe that's why you're always alone?" The laughter stung, sharper than any fall, sharper than the ache in her arm or the empty house at night. Claire felt something inside her shrink. When the bell finally rang, she hurried into class, head down, her heart pounding in her ears. The rest of the day blurred by. Even Emily's friendly chatter couldn't reach her. All Claire could think about was Lucas's voice and the way the other kids had looked at her, not with cruelty, but with that uncomfortable curiosity that makes being different feel like a punishment. That afternoon, Claire skipped her usual walk to the park. She sat at her kitchen table, a fresh letter in her hand, but couldn't bring herself to finish it. What if someone saw her with Sunday again? What if Lucas followed her, or told even more kids? The comfort she'd built around her ritual felt suddenly fragile, as if one wrong step might break it forever. For the next few days, Claire wrote her letters but kept them hidden in her notebook. She watched the park from her bedroom window, seeing Sunday's golden shape waiting by the mailbox. The guilt weighed heavy on her chest, but embarrassment kept her away. She missed the sound of her own voice carried on the wind, missed the way Sunday's eyes made her feel brave and understood. She missed her friend. On the third day, as she trudged home from school with her backpack dragging at her shoulders, Claire spotted something strange on her front lawn. At first, she thought it was a trick of the sunlight, a golden shape just beyond the hedges. But as she drew closer, her heart leaped. Sunday was there, sitting on the grass as if he'd always belonged. His fur glowed in the late afternoon light, and his eyes brightened when he saw her. For a long moment, Claire just stood there, unsure whether to cry or laugh. How had he found her? The park was 3 blocks away, through winding streets and across busy intersections. Sunday had never followed her this far before. A neighbor, Mrs. Howard, came out to water her flowers and noticed Claire staring. "That dog's been wandering this street lately," she remarked, nodding at Sunday. "Looks like he's waiting for someone." Her voice was kind, gentle, and for a fleeting second, Claire felt a wave of gratitude. Maybe, she thought, not everyone saw her as strange. That evening, Claire sat on the front steps, Sunday at her side. She didn't have the courage to speak. Not yet. Instead, she simply rested her head against his soft shoulder, feeling the warmth of his fur, the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. Sunday stayed perfectly still, as if he understood that sometimes silence said everything that words couldn't. The street was quiet, save for the distant sound of a lawnmower and a chorus of crickets tuning up for the night. Claire's mother returned home, bags under her eyes, but smiled softly at the sight of her daughter and the collie together on the steps. She didn't ask questions, just gave Claire's hair a gentle ruffle and slipped inside to make dinner. That night, as the stars flickered awake, Claire crept out with a blanket and 2 letters, one for her dad and one she'd written just for Sunday. She sat on the porch steps and read them both aloud. Her voice trembled, but Sunday's steady gaze gave her strength. "Dear Dad," she began, her words soft but growing stronger. "I had a hard week. Sometimes people don't understand, but I'm trying. I have a friend here. His name is Sunday. He listens to everything I say." She paused, glancing at the dog, her lips curling into the first true smile in days. "Thank you for listening, Sunday. I don't know what I'd do without you." She finished both letters, tucked herself into her blanket, and let Sunday curl up beside her. The night was cool, but Claire felt safe, strong even. Maybe being different wasn't so bad, she thought. Maybe it just meant you needed the right kind of friend. As she drifted off to sleep, Sunday kept his silent vigil, ears perked for trouble, eyes fixed on the horizon. In the deep quiet of the night, Claire's fears faded, replaced by the warm certainty that no matter how unkind the world might be, she would always have someone to listen. And the next day, for the first time since Lucas's cruel words, Claire woke up, ready to go back to the park. The night after Sunday first wandered onto Claire's lawn felt like a turning point, a gentle shift in the tides of her quiet world. For the first time in a long while, Claire woke up not with the familiar ache of anxiety, but with a faint flicker of anticipation. It was almost like hope, a fragile, shimmering thing, and that made her chest feel both tight and light at the same time. That morning, before her mother left for work, Claire hesitated in the hallway, clutching her notebook close. She wanted to tell her mom about Sunday, about how the collie had followed her home, but the words tangled in her mouth. Her mother was busy anyway, already halfway out the door, car keys jingling, hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "Don't forget your lunch, sweetie." "I'll see you tonight," she called, planting a distracted kiss on Claire's forehead before disappearing into the rush of a hospital shift. After breakfast, Claire found herself glancing out the window, half expecting Sunday to be gone, a dream that had wandered away in the dawn. But there he was, curled up beneath the maple tree, nose tucked beneath his fluffy tail. The sight filled her with an odd mix of comfort and longing. She stepped out onto the porch, the cool air biting at her bare feet, and made her way down the steps. Sunday lifted his head, ears perked, and gave a soft, slow wag of his tail. It was as if he was saying, "I'm still here." Claire settled on the step beside him, careful not to jostle her cast, and let the silence settle over them. She didn't try to speak. Instead, she rested her head against Sunday's shoulder, breathing in the clean, warm scent of his fur. The world felt softer when she was close to him. Safer. The rough edge of Lucas's words, the stares from her classmates, even the distant ache for her dad. All of it faded and into the background, just for a moment. For a long time, they simply sat together. The sun climbing slowly overhead, birds chirping in the branches above. Claire traced gentle patterns on Sunday's back, the rhythmic rise and fall of his breath calming her own. It felt good not to have to explain herself, not to pretend. With Sunday, she didn't need to be brave or funny or perfect. She could just be. That night, after dinner, Claire couldn't shake the urge to be with Sunday again. She gathered her blanket, her latest letter to her dad, and a brand new one she'd written just for Sunday. The stars blinked overhead, the world settling into a hush as she padded outside. Sunday was waiting on the porch this time, as if he'd known she'd come. Claire sat beside him and unfolded the first letter. She read her father's letter aloud, her voice steady and soft. Stories of school, little jokes about the cat, questions about his days far away. The words felt lighter than they had in weeks, like she was no longer carrying them all alone. When she finished, Claire picked up the second letter, her fingers trembling just a bit. This one wasn't for anyone but Sunday. "Dear Sunday," she began, a shy smile touching her lips. "Thank you for finding me when I needed you most. I don't know how you always know when to show up, but I'm glad you do. I was scared for a while, scared of school, of being different, of everyone looking at me like I'm strange. But when you're here, I feel braver. I feel like myself again. I hope you'll keep coming back. Love, Claire." She read it all, voice quivering, tears prickling at her eyes. When she finished, Sunday pressed his nose into her hand, as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, Claire found Sunday waiting by the front steps, ready to walk with her. She hesitated at first, worried someone from school would see, but Sunday just looked at her with such quiet certainty that she found herself nodding. Together they walked down the street, the collie keeping pace beside her, tail swishing softly. As they neared the park, Claire's anxiety bubbled up again. What if Lucas or the other kids saw her? What if they started laughing all over again? But Sunday didn't flinch. He simply trotted along, glancing back as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm right here." At the mailbox, Claire took a deep breath and slid her letter through the slot. She glanced at Sunday, who sat quietly beside her, looking every bit the noble guardian. For the first time in days, she felt proud, not just of her courage to send the letter, but of her friendship with Sunday. Let them laugh, she thought. They didn't understand, but she did, and that was enough. After that, walking to the park with Sunday became their new routine, no matter what happened at school. Awkward moments in the hallway, whispers that stung like nettles. Claire knew she'd have Sunday waiting at the end of the day. Each walk was a small act of rebellion against her fear, a way to reclaim her space in the world. Her confidence grew in quiet increments. At home, her mother noticed her daughter's smile growing a little wider, her shoulders a bit straighter. On weekends, Claire and Sunday would sit in the yard, reading stories or simply listening to the wind in the trees. Sometimes neighbors would wave as they passed by, nodding in understanding. "That dog's got a heart of gold," Mrs. Howard would say, and Claire would beam with pride. One rainy afternoon, Claire got caught at school with no umbrella. She trudged home under a gray sky, water soaking through her sneakers. When she turned onto her street, she saw Sunday waiting on her porch, completely dry, tail wagging as if he'd been waiting all day just for her. She burst into laughter, the kind that filled the empty corners of her chest, and ran the last few steps to meet him. Inside, she dried off, changed into warm pajamas, and read Sunday. Another letter. This one filled with nonsense rhymes and made-up words that made her giggle uncontrollably. Sunday's head rested on her knee, eyes half closed, ears twitching with every rise and fall of her voice. The bond between them was unspoken, deeper than anything Claire had known before. It wasn't just about sharing secrets or reading letters. It was about letting someone in, trusting that they would stay no matter how dark or confusing things became. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Claire would imagine her father reading her letters, on the other side of the world, smiling at her stories, feeling a little less alone because of the words she'd sent. And she knew that even if it took a long time for him to come home, she'd be okay. Because Sunday would keep walking with her, every step of the way. With Sunday by her side, the world felt a little less frightening, a little more like home. And for Claire, that was everything. Autumn drifted quietly into Shelby, North Carolina, painting the trees in slow strokes of amber and crimson. For most, the changing leaves and the promise of cooler air brought excitement. But for Claire, the new season arrived with an undercurrent of unease. Her mother's face had been tense for days, lips pressed in a thin line each time she glanced at her phone, her words clipped and careful. Claire felt the tension without fully understanding it, sensing that something was coming, a change that she couldn't name, but could feel settling in her chest like a stone. Sunday picked up on it too. He stayed closer than usual, following her from the porch to the yard, waiting outside the kitchen window as she did her homework, sometimes pressing his nose to the glass as if to remind her he was there. One evening, Claire's mother came home late, her eyes red-rimmed and weary. She dropped her bag with a sigh and crouched down in front of Claire, taking both of her daughter's hands in hers. Claire's heart began to pound. She had seen this look before, gentle, apologetic, as if her mom was about to ask her to be braver than she should have to be. "Honey," her mother said softly, "I talked to your dad today. He's okay. He misses you so much, but he won't be coming home just yet. They need him for a while longer." The words struck Claire like cold water. Her father's homecoming was the dream she'd clung to through long months of silence, the light at the end of every hard day. To have that light suddenly snuffed out was almost too much to bear. She nodded, swallowing back tears, and whispered, "Okay, Mom." But inside, her heart cracked open. After her mom went to bed, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her mother's words until they blurred into static. It felt like all the hope she'd carefully gathered, like wildflowers pressed in a book, had scattered in the wind. She wanted to scream, to break something, to make the world notice how unfair it was. Instead, she quietly slid out of bed, grabbed her notebook and a pen, and tiptoed out to the porch. Sunday was already there, curled up on the mat, golden fur glowing under the porch light. He lifted his head as she approached, eyes warm and steady. Claire knelt beside him, her knees pressing into the wood, and tried to find her voice. She wanted to read her letter to her dad, but when she looked at the page, the words swam. Her hands trembled, the pen falling from her fingers and rolling under the railing. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. She tried to start, "Dear Dad," but the rest wouldn't come. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot, splattering the page. Sunday inched closer, nudging her arm with his nose until the letter slipped from her grasp. He rested his head on her knee, eyes fixed on hers, patient and loving. Claire felt the floodgates open. She pressed her forehead into Sunday's soft fur and let herself cry. Big, racking sobs she had hidden from everyone else. All the fear, the anger, the disappointment poured out of her, soaking Sunday's coat and the porch boards beneath them. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Minutes, maybe hours. The world shrank to the circle of light from the porch lamp, the steady rhythm of Sunday's breathing, the gentle touch of his paw as he placed it on her leg. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't run away from her sadness or try to distract her with games. He just stayed, his presence an anchor in a sea of sorrow. Eventually the sobs slowed, replaced by hiccuping breaths and the sting of tired eyes. Claire wiped her cheeks with her sleeve and looked at the crumpled letter, the ink smudged and blurry. She let out a shaky laugh, surprised at herself. "Sorry, Sunday," she whispered, stroking his head. "I guess I needed that." The collie gazed back at her, tail thumping quietly against the porch. There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding, a kind of love so simple and complete that it needed no words. Claire smoothed out the letter, her hands steadier now, and tried again. She wrote about missing her dad, about feeling angry and helpless and so small. She wrote about Sunday, about how he never left her side, how his eyes seemed to say, "You're not alone." She poured every ounce of sadness and hope onto the page, letting her pen move as fast as her thoughts could flow. As she wrote, Sunday stayed pressed against her, his body warm and real and constant. The porch grew cold, but she barely noticed. When she finished, she read the letter aloud, her voice ragged but clear. Sunday listened to every word, never looking away. When the last sentence faded into the night, Claire let the silence linger. There was healing in saying the hard things out loud, in trusting that someone cared enough to hear them. She pressed her face to Sunday's fur one last time, breathing in the smell of grass and earth, the scent of safety. Finally, she gathered her things and went back inside. Sleep came easier than she expected. For the first time since her father's call, her dreams were gentle, filled with soft golden light and the steady heartbeat of her friend. The next morning, Claire woke to a gray sky, rain tapping at the window. She wrapped herself in a sweater, tucked the hard letter into her backpack, and went downstairs. Her mom was already gone for the day, but Claire didn't feel as alone as before. Sunday was waiting by the door, tail wagging, ready to walk beside her, rain or shine. That afternoon, they returned to the mailbox together. Claire's hands trembled as she slipped the letter through the slot, but she didn't hesitate. Sunday sat next to her, head held high, as if to say, "We got through it. Together." As they walked home, Claire felt something inside her shift again. Not a full return to happiness, but a small seed of strength. The pain of her father's absence was still there, raw and aching, but now she knew she could survive it. She had Sunday, and her words, and the courage to keep moving forward, one step, one letter, one day at a time. And so, autumn pressed on, carrying with it the promise of change and the certainty of love, steady as the collie by her side. The rhythm of autumn settled in, and though the days grew shorter and the nights came sooner, something inside Claire was beginning to wake up. Her father's absence still lingered in the air. At dinner, in the empty chair across from her at the kitchen table, in the small, careful silences she and her mother shared. But it didn't feel as crushing as before. There was a new steadiness to Claire, as if she'd learned to breathe a little deeper, stand a little taller, walk a little more bravely in her own shoes. Every week, Claire kept mailing letters. Her handwriting grew neater, her words clearer, her stories livelier. She described not just her pain, but her hopes and victories. Small things that seemed insignificant to others, but to Claire, felt like mountains climbed. "I answered a question in class today, Dad. My voice was shaky, but I did it. And my teacher smiled at me." Or, "I laughed at lunch." Not just a little giggle, a real laugh. It felt so strange, but good. Sunday became more than a secret. Hmm? Neighbors on Claire's street began to recognize the golden collie, who walked faithfully at her side each afternoon. Some waved or called greetings. The mailman, Mr. Archer, gave Sunday a biscuit from his pocket every time he passed. Even the other kids at school started to notice that the quiet kid was changing. Still reserved, but a little less withdrawn, a little more present. One chilly morning, as Claire was buttoning her jacket and getting ready to leave, her mother paused at the doorway, a mug of coffee warming her hands. She watched as Claire adjusted her backpack and gave Sunday a gentle scratch behind the ears. There was a quiet pride in her mother's eyes, a look that said more than any words could. "You seem happier, sweet pea," her mother said softly. Claire nodded, not quite trusting herself to speak. She wasn't sure she was happy. Not fully. But she was lighter. The sadness hadn't disappeared, but it wasn't the only thing she carried anymore. With Sunday beside her, even the hardest days felt survivable. At school, Claire's teacher, Mrs. Warren, began to notice the change, too. She saw the way Claire's hand shot up, timidly, but undeniably, during a spelling game. She watched as Claire smiled at a classmate's joke at lunch, the lines of worry on her face slowly smoothing out. One afternoon, Mrs. Warren stopped Claire after class. "I've noticed you're speaking up more," she said kindly. "I'm proud of you, Claire. You're very brave." Claire ducked her head, embarrassed but secretly pleased. The words stayed with her all day, warming her from the inside out. Every day after school, Claire and Sunday returned to their favorite spot by the old mailbox. The park was quieter now, as the weather cooled. The playground empty, except for the occasional squirrel darting through the leaves. Claire sat on the bench, her backpack at her feet, and read her letters out loud, sometimes for her dad, sometimes just for Sunday. The collie listened with his usual devotion, his eyes calm and reassuring, his tail thumping gently with every story or joke. And one afternoon, while Claire was reading about her math test, how she'd missed a question but didn't cry, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see her mother, who'd finished work early and had come searching for her daughter. Instead of asking why Claire was talking to a dog, her mother just sat beside her and listened, smiling at the simple scene of her daughter, and Sunday sharing secrets with the autumn air. It became a new ritual. Sometimes, on weekends, Claire's mom would bring a cup of tea and join them on the porch. She'd listen as Claire read stories, and sometimes she'd even add her own, tales from her own childhood or silly hospital stories that made both Claire and Sunday's ears perk up. The effect of Sunday's friendship rippled through every part of Claire's life. The anxious knots that used to twist in her stomach before class began to loosen. She made a new friend, a girl named Jasmine, who had moved in from Raleigh. Jasmine liked to draw and carried a sketchbook everywhere, and soon the two girls were exchanging doodles and trading stories about their pets. Emily, too, came back into Claire's orbit, drawn by the quiet confidence she saw blooming in her friend. Even Lucas, the boy who'd once mocked Claire, seemed to sense the change. He stopped teasing her, whether out of boredom or because he saw her surrounded by new friends. Claire couldn't say. It no longer mattered. At home, her mom's quiet vigilance softened. She no longer lingered at the door, listening for signs of sadness. She saw Claire laughing with her friends, brushing Sunday's fur on the porch, or reading quietly in the living room. On more than one occasion, she found Sunday curled up on Claire's bed, the two of them fast asleep, a notebook open and forgotten between them. The collie became part of their family. Claire and her mom bought him a blue collar, one to match Claire's old cast, with a silver tag engraved Sunday. He wore it proudly, prancing around the yard like he'd always belonged there. But perhaps the greatest change was the one Claire felt inside herself. She learned that pain and joy could exist side by side, that it was possible to be sad and still find reasons to smile. Sunday didn't take away her loneliness, but he helped her carry it until it wasn't so heavy. As Thanksgiving approached, Claire wrote her father one more letter before the holiday. She told him about Sunday and all the ways he'd helped her heal. She wrote, I still miss you every day, Dad. But I'm learning to be strong. Sunday helps me remember that I'm not alone. When you come home, I want you to meet him. He's my best friend. After mailing her letter, Claire sat beside Sunday on the porch, feeling the cool wind on her cheeks and the warmth of her friend beside her. The world was still uncertain, still full of longing and waiting. But with Sunday there, steady as ever, Claire knew she could face whatever came next. One day, one letter, one hopeful afternoon at a time. The days grew colder as autumn deepened into early winter, and the little house in Shelby seemed to glow from within each evening, yellow lamplight pooling across the kitchen floor, the scent of cinnamon and baking apples wafting through the air. For Claire, the weeks after her hardest letter brought an unfamiliar sense of peace. There was still a hole in her heart where her father should have been, but it wasn't quite as sharp. There were smiles at dinner, laughter at Sunday's antics, even the beginnings of new traditions. Board games on Friday nights, or pumpkin muffins on Sundays, and of course, letters. So many letters. Now as much about hope as hurt. Each morning, Claire checked the mailbox, sometimes finding a thin blue envelope in return. Her father's handwriting rough and slanted, his stories of distant places and faraway friends tucked between short, loving sentences. "You make me brave, Claire Bear," he wrote in one letter. "Keep writing. I read every word." Those lines became her anchor. She read them to Sunday, who always wagged his tail, as if he too could understand the comfort and longing stitched into every phrase. Then, on a cold Saturday morning, everything changed. Claire woke to the sound of a car pulling up outside, a sound so familiar yet suddenly electric with possibility. She scrambled out of bed, her heart pounding, feet tangling in her covers. Sunday, always attuned to her moods, bounded off the bed and pressed his nose to the window, tail whipping in excited circles. Through the frosted glass, Claire saw a figure in uniform stepping out of the car, broad-shouldered, carrying a duffel bag, hair a little grayer than before, but unmistakably her father. For a moment she stood frozen, breath held, not daring to hope. Then she heard her mother's joyful cry, the front door flying open, and suddenly Claire was running, barefoot, pajamas twisted, laughter and tears tumbling together. She threw herself into her father's arms, burying her face in his jacket, feeling the solid, steady thump of his heartbeat under her cheek. He scooped her up, spinning her in a circle, whispering her name over and over, like it was the most precious word in the world. "Claire, my Claire Bear, look at you. You're taller than I remember," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She pulled back, beaming, tears streaking down her face. "You're really here. You're really home." Her mother joined them, hugging them both tightly, while laughter and sobs mingling in the chilly air. Sunday stood nearby, tail wagging, eyes bright, as if understanding this was a moment he had helped create. Claire's father noticed the collie almost immediately. He knelt down to Sunday's level, extending a hand as if greeting an old friend. "And who's this?" he asked, looking between his daughter and the golden dog. Claire wiped her eyes and smiled wider than she had in months. "That's Sunday. He waited with me," she said softly, voice trembling with gratitude and pride. Her father ruffled Sunday's fur, his expression softening as he looked at the gentle eyes that had guarded his little girl. "Well, Sunday, I think you're family now. Thank you for taking care of my Claire." For the rest of the day, the house was filled with a kind of joyful chaos Claire had almost forgotten. Stories traded around the table, laughter echoing off the walls, her mother humming as she cooked a welcome home meal. Sunday was everywhere, curling up at her father's feet, following Claire from room to room, sneaking bits of roast chicken from under the table with her dad's help. The three of them, Claire, her mom, and her dad, felt complete again, like pieces of a puzzle, finally snapping into place. Later that afternoon, after the excitement had settled, Claire and her dad sat on the porch steps. Sunday nestled between them. The air was cold and crisp, but none of them minded. Claire handed her father a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. "These are all the letters I wrote while you were gone. Some of them, some of them were hard, but Sunday listened to everyone. I think he knew when I needed him most," Claire explained, looking at Sunday with shining eyes. Her father turned the letters over in his hands, his expression tender. "You're braver than I ever was at your age," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you, Claire, and I'm proud of your friend here, too." Sunday thumped his tail, nuzzling first Claire, then her dad. For a while, they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin to set, it painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. As evening deepened, Claire led her dad to the park for the first time since he'd returned. Together, they walked the old, familiar path, Sunday leading the way to the red mailbox. Claire showed her father where she'd dropped every letter, where she and Sunday had sat and waited, where hope and loneliness had mixed in the autumn air. Her father listened, arm around her shoulder, sometimes wiping at his eyes as she recounted her fears and her small victories. When they reached the mailbox, Claire paused, running her fingers over the faded paint. "I always wondered if you'd feel my words all the way over there," she said softly. "I did," her father replied. "I felt you every single day." Back at home, Claire's mom joined them in a game of sidewalk chalk on the front walk. Claire drawing flowers and suns, her dad sketching stick figures with Sunday at their side. Sunday dozed in the yard, finally relaxed, his work as messenger and guardian, for now, fulfilled. As dusk fell and the stars blinked awake, Claire sat with her dad and Sunday, feeling the weight of waiting finally lift from her shoulders. She knew there would be other hard days, other letters to write, but for now, her family was whole, and Sunday was still at her side. For the first time in what felt like forever, Claire felt truly home. Winter settled over Shelby in gentle waves. The first dusting of frost glinting on rooftops and the park lawn where Claire and Sunday once sat alone. But inside the Thompson home, everything felt warmer. Laughter drifted from the kitchen every morning. The air was filled with the sounds of Claire and her father catching up, stories about school, about his time overseas, and about all the ways they'd missed each other. The red mailbox in the park stood as a silent witness to it all. No longer did it receive sad, lonely letters from Claire every Sunday. Those days had softened into memory, replaced now by afternoons of sidewalk chalk, shared meals, and games of fetch with Sunday in the yard. Yet, Claire still visited the mailbox sometimes, pausing with Sunday to trace the names and hearts she and her dad had scratched into the peeling paint. It was no longer a place of longing, but a symbol of promises kept and hope restored. In those first weeks after her father's return, Claire's world seemed to bloom. She spoke more freely at school, laughter coming easily now, her shyness gradually replaced by a quiet confidence. Mrs. Warren, her teacher, would smile when Claire volunteered an answer, and even Emily and Jasmine would cheer her on when she tried something new. At lunch, she would sometimes sit at the edge of the playground, a group of friends gathered close. Sunday's name, the punchline of jokes and the star of many stories. Sunday remained the center of Claire's world, a loyal companion who never strayed far from her side. Each afternoon, he would appear at the yard gate, tail wagging, eyes sparkling with delight, as Claire returned from school or a woot. He became a fixture in the Thompson family, her father taking him for long walks on weekends, her mother sneaking him bits of roast chicken during Sunday dinners, and Claire reading him stories in the golden light of late afternoon. There were days when the old fears crept back, moments when Claire's heart raced or she hesitated before speaking up in class. On those days, Sunday would nuzzle her hand or sit quietly beside her, a gentle reminder that she was never truly alone. Even her classmates came to understand that Sunday was more than just a dog. He was a steady friend, a silent protector who had helped Claire find her voice again. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast a golden hue over the front yard, Claire and her dad sat together, drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. Sunday dozed in the grass, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching with the sound of laughter and stories. Claire's dad watched them both, a look of peace on his face that Claire had not seen in years. He leaned over, brushing a stray lock of hair from Claire's face. "Looks like someone made sure your words got where they needed to go," he said quietly, nodding towards Sunday. Claire smiled, glancing at the collie, her heart full. "He did, Dad. He really did." As winter deepened, new routines took root. There were no more Sunday letters. Now there were Sunday games, Sunday walks, and Sunday naps. Claire and her father built a birdhouse for the yard. Her mom planted bulbs in the garden, dreaming of spring. Even the neighbors took part, stopping by with treats for Sunday or to listen to Claire's latest story about school. Claire sometimes wondered about the power of words, the way her letters had carried her pain, her love, her hope, all the way across the world to her father. She realized now that some messengers didn't need stamps or mailboxes. Some messengers had golden fur and soft brown eyes, and they carried presents, not paper. Sunday had delivered something far more important than a letter. He had delivered her back to herself. On Christmas morning, Claire found a small box under the tree, wrapped in shiny blue paper. Inside was a silver tag engraved with Sunday's name, and on the back, the words, "Our messenger. Thank you for carrying us through." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes as she knelt and fastened the tag to Sunday's collar. He licked her cheek in response, tail thumping in the quiet, joyful way that always made her laugh. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The world kept spinning, bringing new joys and new challenges. But now, whatever happened, Claire knew she was ready. She knew the silence was not something to fear, but a place where voices, her own, her father's, even Sunday's silent comfort, could grow strong and brave. In the evenings, as dusk painted the sky and the first stars appeared, Claire would sometimes sit on the porch steps, Sunday at her side, her father nearby. She'd close her eyes and listen, not just for the sounds of laughter or the distant hum of cars, but for the deep, reassuring presence of those she loved. And in that quiet, she would remember, some messengers don't carry letters, they carry presents, and they stay until the silence is ready to speak. Underscore, 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 underscore. If this story stayed with you, share it forward and subscribe for more stories that sit beside us until we're ready.